The Byzantine Empire, a medieval state known to those who lived in it as the Empire of the Romans, occupies a seminal role in the histories of many parts of the world. Known for its splendorous art and architecture and its theological, legal and philosophical contributions, Byzantium was an empire of historical contradictions. One of these is its very identity. While the Byzantine Empire was the successor state to ancient Rome, an imperium associated with the Latin language and culture, its territories were concentrated in regions where Greek was the lingua franca. Its form of Orthodox Christianity, the vehicle with which it influenced Eastern Europe, used Greek as its primary liturgical language. This form of the Roman Empire shifted to using the Greek language and culture, and is nowadays seen as part of Greek history. The question thus arises, how much did the Byzantine Empire associate with the ancient Greeks? On the one hand, the Eastern Roman Empire of the Middle Ages was in many ways the inheritor of classical Greco-Roman culture. Still, on the other hand, Byzantine Christianity was traditionally seen as hostile to ancient Greek wisdom. In this episode, we will unpack these contradictions. We will see how Hellenization unfolded in Byzantine language, culture, ethnicity, and politics, and how this Hellenism interacted with other components of Byzantium's worldview universalisms like Christianity and Roman identity. Traditionally, Byzantium is meant to have transitioned into the use of Greek language and culture in administration in the 6th to 8th centuries CE. This conception is usually also accompanied by a shift in perception. Byzantium became Greek in identity after this period. However, the trajectory with which this has happened is more complex, as is the question of identity. In order to understand how the Hellenization of Byzantium unfolded, we must first look at Greco-Roman relations in earlier periods to have a historical foundation of this process. By the time the capital of the Roman Empire was moved to Constantinople in 330 CE, Greece and Rome had been in a paradoxical relationship for centuries. Rome had annexed Greece nearly 400 years earlier in 146 BCE, and some of its elites had bouts of anti-Greek sentiment due to their supposed weakness. But equal numbers of others had admiration for Greece. In fact, when Emperor Constantine moved the capital of the empire to Byzantium, the future site of the city of Constantinople, he also commissioned a relief of the Gigantomachy, the battle of the Olympians and giants from Greek mythology, to be displayed in the city. Moreover, throughout the apex of the classical Roman Empire, both Greek and Latin were considered languages of education and prestige, and many Roman elites were fluent in both tongues. The Romans preferred the version of Greek culture which existed prior to Alexander the Great's Eastern invasions, after which they perceived Greek culture to have been corrupted by what they saw as the hedonism of Eastern cultures like Persia. This meant that many Romans saw themselves as superior to the current form of Greek culture. The structure of the Roman Empire was based around Latin, which was the language of the state and the elites. However, while Latin predominated at the highest levels of government and multilingualism was the norm in the Roman Empire, Greek was still one of the most influential languages in Roman society, particularly as a lingua franca, or common tongue, in the eastern provinces like Egypt, Syria, and Anatolia. Throughout late antiquity, the western half of the Roman Empire declined, while the economic and cultural hub of the Roman world increasingly shifted to the Greek-speaking East, resulting in the Greek language rising further in prominence on the world stage. This era also coincided with the rise of Christianity, a religion which, in its early days, had a contradictory relationship with classical Greek culture. Many early church fathers, like Gregory of Nazianzus, used Greek philosophy and logic in their theology, but were also wary of possible temptations, like lapsing from Christianity, that could arise if one became too immersed in Greek culture. The first few centuries of the Eastern Roman Empire were thus somewhat paradoxical. On one hand, Latin remained the language of the elite and public administration, but Greek was rapidly outpacing it in prestige. Moreover, due to Christian influence, things which were considered to be classically Greek were associated negatively with paganism. Yet classic Greek literature was a source of philosophical inspiration and enrichment, which many early Christians drew upon to form the bedrock of their faith. Despite these contradictions, classical Greek language and culture continued to rise in prominence, and by the time of Emperor Justinian, the Eastern Roman Empire had shifted from Latin to Greek. This process would only accelerate after the end of late antiquity. Officially, it was during the reign of Emperor Justinian in the 6th century CE that the Hellenization of the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire began. Justinian himself was not a Hellenizer, and his legal codex was mostly written in Latin. However, his post-534 CE legislation was codified in both Latin and Greek, reflecting the slow linguistic shift which had been occurring ever since the capital of the empire had been moved from Rome to Constantinople. As the Greek language became the primary language of the Eastern Roman Empire after Justinian's reign, classical Greek culture endured within it too. Several of Justinian's successors utilized symbolism from classical Greek myths to promote their legitimacy. For example, reliefs and art from the period depict the Byzantine emperor Heraclius as the iconic hero Heracles from Greek mythology. Due to the upheavals caused by the Islamic conquests, Byzantine society shifted dramatically during this period. It became more feudal and more focused on the cause of Anatolia and the Balkans. A further shift occurred with the conquests of the Islamic caliphates. The Arabs took over the Syriac and Coptic-speaking centers of Syria and Egypt, reducing the linguistic diversity of Eastern Rome and leaving the Greek-speaking hub of Constantinople as its last major cultural hub. After the Arab conquests, many of Eastern Rome's ethnic minorities were now under Muslim rule, leaving the Byzantines as a now more ethnically homogeneous empire. Thus, a conceptual turn occurred. To be Roman became more identified with a citizen of the empire and a Greek speaker at that. This increasing association of the Roman identity to Greekness often came at the detriment of other ethnicities, like Armenians and Slavs, who still lived in Byzantine territory well after the Islamic expansions. The contradiction was that Roman citizenship was meant to break through ideas of lineage and descent for those who were not enslaved after the 3rd century CE. However, Orthodox Christianity and even the Greek language started to become signifiers of being Roman, in essence hijacking the civic form of Roman citizenship in favor of one based more on ethnicity. Over the 6th to 9th centuries, this process continued as the language of administration continued shifting from Latin to Greek. This was the case even in southern Italy, where the Byzantines maintained provinces well into the Middle Ages. There, a Greek-speaking population existed, being the ancestors of the Greco and Calabrian Greek speakers that still inhabit southern Italy to this day. As Byzantium's identity shifted from being a multi-ethnic empire to a primarily Greek polity, its neighbours also began to shift their perception of Byzantium. States like the Carolingians or the Arabs used the word Roman to describe Byzantium, but equally saw it as the land of the Greeks. As the self-perception of the Byzantines shifted, the meaning of Rome became synonymous with the Greek language and culture. Let us now discuss how Hellenic culture impacted Orthodox Christianity. As we previously stated, Christianity and Hellenism in the Byzantine Empire had a strained relationship, as the latter was considered synonymous with being pagan. So how did the two interact and reconcile each other? The first means were educational. Many Christian monks and priests in Byzantium were educated in Greek. As early as the 4th century CE, many recognized and tried to resolve the tension between Greek and Christian philosophical thought. Both Basil of Caesarea and Gregory Nazianzus tried to identify which things were good about Greek thought, and thus worthy of adoption into Christian thinking. They also tried to identify which things were bad from a Christian perspective and discard them. Gregory placed emphasis on Athens with its many philosophical schools, calling it a golden city of letters, and one where the temptation of paganism was strong. Other 4th century Christian theologians, like Eusebius of Caesarea, advocated for a more hardline rejection of all classic Greek philosophy in Christianity, showing that the attitude that early Christians in the Byzantine Empire had towards classical Greek culture were diverse, tense, and divided. By the later Byzantine period of the 9th century CE onwards, the liturgical language of the empire had almost exclusively become Greek, at least in the major Byzantine core territories. Thus, many priests and monks had begun to tackle the challenge of reconciling the two cultural traditions. One such man was the Byzantine hieromonk Michael Psellos in the 11th century CE. Psellos was a major yet controversial figure, having been educated in the Byzantine Ivy League, the Pandidactyrion of Constantinople. Psellos placed heavy emphasis on the Hellenistic philosophical tradition of Neoplatonism. Many scholars had done this before and would do so since, but Psellos was a clear departure from previous theologians in how much emphasis he put on the importance of Greek thinking. considering it to be a necessary complement to Christian thinking. By connecting the two traditions in his philosophy, Psellos emphasized the importance of humans being able to use both. It should also be noted that Byzantine Christianity never renounced mystical or magical practices within Christianity. Indeed, the ancient Greeks were very interested in mysticism themselves, and Psellos also wrote major works on Christian demonology and the study of demons, many of which were influenced by the pagan mythologies of ancient Greece. Throughout Eastern Roman history, the Greek or Hellenic aspects of Byzantine culture also came into conflict with the idea of Romanitas, or to be Roman, a conflict which was ultimately resolved. The Byzantines were major fans of Herodotus, the Greek historian, for his anthropological studies. The Byzantines used this ancient Greek mindset to understand other cultures through their diplomatic missions, a form of human intelligence. This had an impact on the perception of others, and thus in how Romanness was perceived as an ethnically Greek-speaking category. As Greek became more and more a lingua franca, Romanness became synonymous with the Greek language. Non-Greek Orthodox Christians were considered brethren but not ethnic kin by the Byzantines. This is best exemplified by the attitudes towards Slavs. Many Slavic peoples converted to Christianity due to Byzantine missionary efforts, and were part of a cultural network called the Byzantine Commonwealth, which we've done a video on. Despite being Orthodox Christian, the Slavs were never considered Roman, as that was only possible if they assimilated into Greek culture. Byzantine notions of kingship were also a curious mixture of the Roman, Greek, and Christian ideals. The Byzantine emperor had to ensure the welfare of the people, much like Roman and Hellenistic kings were meant to. However, the Byzantine emperor was also a Christian institution, though there are debates as to whether the Byzantine emperor was seen as appointed by God, or as later scholars like Anthony Kaldelis claim, as a manager of God's creation. Both forms of rulership come with responsibilities and are a sort of synthesis of Greek, Roman, and Christian ideals of monarchy. This intricate combination of concepts shows that as time went on, Byzantine society resolved the tensions between Hellenic, Roman, and Christian worldviews in both how it perceived itself and how its government functioned. Let us now move on and discuss how this new Hellenism, infused with Roman and Christian practices, manifested in Byzantine society. Byzantine Hellenism took a few forms and had various interesting strands that impacted the life of the Byzantine elite. One of these was the influence of ancient Greek literature on the prose and style of Byzantine literature. Evidence of ancient Greek influences in medieval Byzantine writing can be found in the Alexiad by Princess Anna Komnena, which is a history of the reign of the princess's father, Alexios I of the Komnenian dynasty. Inheriting their Roman ancestors' love of ancient Greek traditions, the Byzantines often utilized a writing strategy in their books known as Atticisms. Atticisms were attempts to emulate the Attic dialect of Ionian Greek, which was spoken in Athens during the era of classical Greece. Of course, ancient Greece was not the only place from where the Byzantines took literary inspiration. Byzantine romances, for instance, borrowed from the prose styles of France and Europe, while Christianity's roots in Jewish and Aramaic thought were always present in Byzantine liturgical and theological conceptions of heavenly realms. However, the shift to Greek as a government language led Byzantium to immerse itself in parts of classical Greek thought. Mentions of Greek deities sometimes still appeared in Byzantine texts. However, the Greek gods were depicted as human rather than divine, in order to satisfy the Christian sensibilities of the age. Mythological figures like Charon, the one who delivers souls to the afterlife in Greek myth, influenced Byzantine folklore. For instance, in some later medieval poems written after the end of Byzantine rule in Cyprus, the half-Saracen, half-Greek warrior Digenis Akritas wrestles and defeats Charon. The ancient Greek Grim Reaper only wins by complaining to him about the unfairness of it all. These examples show the remnants of Byzantine Hellenism amongst the Orthodox Christian populations of the lands once ruled by the empire. Byzantium's Hellenism was a unique and new cultural system. It was influenced by other Orthodox cultures, as well as Islamic and Latin cultural spheres, but it was Greek-speaking and perceived itself as an heir to both Rome and to ancient Greece. As the wheels of the medieval age continued to turn, Byzantine Hellenism faced a major challenge. The contraction of the empire by Islamic empires like the Seljuks happened in conjunction with the coming of the Crusaders, who, after opportunistic alliances with Byzantium, ended up carving the empire after sacking Constantinople in 1204 CE. After this, Byzantine successor states, such as those in Nicaea, became irrevocably hostile to the Latins of Western Europe. This led to an interesting development: the further fusing of the Greek language with Byzantine Roman identity. Theodore Lascaris II, the ruler of Nicaea, was an important element of this development. Lascaris praised classical Greek culture and aimed to promote it in both court and Byzantine thinking during his short reign in Nicaea. This continued even after the Palaiologos dynasty recovered Constantinople and restored the Byzantine Empire, with Byzantine emperors beginning to see themselves as distinct from the Catholics and more focused on their linguistic legacy of Hellenic tradition. During this late Byzantine period, the distinction between the Byzantines and the Latins became quasi-ethnic in nature. This is not the same as modern Greek identity, that is a 19th century development. But the Hellenism of Byzantium was now not just a cultural marker, but a means to express opposition to the Latin West. This is why, even when under threat from the Ottomans, many Byzantine notables were not keen to become Catholic in order to save the empire. With the conquest of Constantinople by the Ottomans on Tuesday, May 29, 1453, this Orthodox identity became the defining feature of Ottoman Greek speakers, who were mostly ruled by elite educated patriarchs in Constantinople who studied in the Greek manner. However, they were not called Yunan, the Turkish word for the Greeks, but Rum or Romans. This Rum identity was Greek in tongue and liturgy, but Christian in faith, and Roman in its relationship with the Sublime Porte. It was Byzantine Hellenism's religious dimension organized to serve the Ottoman system. As we have seen, the Hellenization of Byzantium had foundations in Greco-Roman culture, as well as in the geography of the Eastern Roman Empire. It also had a foundation based on the idea of Romans as the Orthodox Christian Greek speakers of Byzantium. After the cultural shifts which had begun under Justinian and accelerated under Heraclius, the Hellenization of Byzantium continued, and then finally exploded by the early medieval period under luminous dynasties such as the Komneni and Palaiologi. It even became quasi-ethnic, a convergence of the Orthodox, Hellenic and Roman ideals into one grand and unique civilization. It was through combining these three parts of itself that Byzantium came to define itself and produced one of the most illustrious legacies in world history, as illustrious as the golden icons of Byzantine churches.